We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down.
Welcome to this, I think it's the third now, Politics in Pub meeting that we've had here in central London. Well, since the last meeting, which wasn't actually that long ago, we've got a new Prime Minister, haven't we? They seem to come along quite often these days, don't they? Well, our new Prime Minister's been waxing lyrical about devolution. Currently, there's no party in the polls, I think, from what I've seen recently, that are above 30%. The usual spiralling government debt is going on. And we're here this evening to ask, what type of democracy serves us best? Direct, parliamentary, or devolved? Well, I'm delighted to be joined here this evening for our discussion by two esteemed guests. To my right is Neil Petrie, who's from the Direct Democracy Movement. And to my left is Joanna Marchong, who is the new Senior Analyst and Head of Campaigns at Onward. So what I'd like to do first is to ask our guests just to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what they're here to talk about. So Neil, you'd like to go first?
Right, yeah, thank you. Well, they say you always start with a joke, and it's a way of gauging your audience as well. So I'll start with mine, all right? And that is that we live in a democracy. I have a question for you, just to get rolling. Do you feel you are heard in any shape or form on important political issues? If you stick your hand up if you do think that. Nobody? Well, those of you who would like to be heard, would you stick your hand up? There we go, all right. That's direct democracy in a very simple fashion, obviously. So the Swiss system is based around a semi-direct democracy, which is what I will be talking about. But in terms of introduction of myself, I'll just go through the political side of it. 1979, I went along to Maggie Thatcher's, win for the election. My first time of voting, I was 19, and I remember going along there, and I knew a bit about Greek history and Latin and all the rest of it, and this is not very democratic, is it? That's what I thought at the time. It was an odd system to me, and I thought, okay, well, that's what we've got. It's pretty ropey, I thought. Anyway, so I went in the army, 1981, served 19 years, but during that time, I was lucky enough to serve in Germany. 1985, someone told me about the Swiss system. And I went, what, referendums like that? Regular feedback in direct democracy? Yes, regular. So that piqued my interest. And then luckily, about 1991, 92 it was, the referendum party was set up. And in fact, Rupert Lowe was an MP candidate for them. So I backed that. I was in the army still, so you can't be very voluble about it, obviously. But then a few years later, I left in 1997. Came out of the military, retired, and I went to run a load of companies all over Central Asia and the Middle East. Spent 15 years in Muslim countries, working in those places, running security companies and other operations. But you see, from 1997, I started to, I could start saying things. And so by 2016, of course, we had the Brexit referendum. I've been in UKIP since I pretty much left the military, and I supported, obviously, the referendum, getting out of Europe, because it was a referendum. It was a form of at least some direct democracy being utilised. Because I'd seen how, what I thought was a rubbish system, the parliamentary system, in terms of the total reliance on the representatives. And if you know what the old name of the whip is, okay, the old name was the patronage secretary, okay? That is the real name that they held in the past, which gives you a great idea of what the system is about. It's about parcelling out patronage to keep the MPs in line. So the system is corrupt from the very outset. It is, I was in the intelligence game when I was in the military, and it's just what we would call a handling operation. It's an agent handling operation, that's all it is. The whips are controlling their agents, who are the MPs, and the whips and the leaders are controlled by the backers, whoever they may be, and that's how the system works. That's all it is. Epstein, Mandelson. Epstein, Noam Chomsky in the United States. Epstein on the right, Trump. Epstein on the right as well, you might say here, Prince Andrew, etc., etc. Across the globe, though. So it's a handling operation at the very highest level. It's completely cynical. That's the point. Oh my God. All right. So I don't know. Have many of you heard much about the Swiss system? Do you know much about the semi-direct system? No, it's very straightforward. You have, yeah. Well, you'll know that it's a mixture of representatives. So you still have parliamentarians. You still have parliament, but you also have a right to call referendums on a lot of issues. And so I call it the 0, 1, 2 system. 0, there are mandatory ones for those who are, if you want to amend the constitution. The 1%, any change in legislation, you need to get 1% of the voters to sign up to call for a referendum. So you don't get a referendum unless you get 1% signing up to demand it. And then the 2% is what they call the popular initiative. So you can come up with an idea yourself and put it forward. So anyway, as I said, by the time I'd finished in the army and I'd done my bits, I was eventually called on to the Direct Democracy Bunch, asked me to join them in 2020, and I joined them as a board member. So that's really my story today, and I can tell you a bit more about it, obviously, during question time. Thank you very much.
Joanna.
Tough act to follow. I think when we all think about democracy, we have our own intuitive feelings as to what that looks like. And then when you have other models in front of you, you think, well, yes, I want more of a stake in government. Yes, I want to be heard. How do we get there? And when you have devolution on the table, it looks completely different from what you would imagine. And I can only sit here and say that from data points, basically. We look at what has actually been achieved when you have a devolved system, and we saw it twice. We saw it many times, but we've seen it majorly twice. In Scotland, 2014, when we had the massive Brexit referendum in 2016, I don't think we should overlook these canon events or forget exactly what it taught us. Scotland and Wales have had 25 years of devolution. What has it produced? I know in Scotland, when they had, in 1999, they had the best education system, some would say, in Europe. 25 years later, they're not doing so well. The math scores are below England average. They are on par with OECD levels. That's a major drop to have, and you have to think about why. And then if you look at crime, for example, crime is still up. Drug deaths, worse than Europe. It's about 4 times worse than when Trainspotting came out, for goodness sake. You have A&E waiting times linked to about 800 avoidable deaths in a year. So when we think about that, we have to think about why this has occurred. We think about funding. Funding per capita, so per head, has been higher than England, and it's been the highest that they've ever seen as well. And my point today would be, devolution is great. It has its benefits, but again, we forget that closest to government, we think equals quality, but oftentimes it hasn't. We've completely forgot, or we've not understood the full scheme of devolution, where if you're allowed to spend and you have the power to spend, you must have the power to be held accountable. So your failures are your own as well. You can't have Westminster bailing you out every single time. Again, I'm not here to defend the status quo. I would absolutely love to be heard. I would love all these things. I understand that trust in politics is at an all-time low. People turning out to vote, again, an all-time low. Is what we vote for when we have these general elections and we have party leadership contests, is that actually representative of what the general public think? I personally don't think so. But there's something to be said that when you look at the models of devolution, that it doesn't actually mean better standards or better quality, better results. It actually is just more of the same, especially in the ways that we've seen it in the UK. And again, you can look at the Switzerland system, you can look at California or states in America, you can look at it anywhere else it's been done, but they have different cultural factors that allow them to bear better results. And if the UK are really serious about devolution, I'm on board, but it needs to have accountability, responsibility, and we need to understand why it's working abroad and what are the broader factors that we need to institute in the UK, because it's not as simple as clicking your fingers, making loads of metro mayors, having more referendums every year. There's more, and as we go on with more questions, we'll get to the root of it and we'll realise it's not simple when you look at the case studies. It's not an easy open book, shut book case.
Thank you. So, Neil, you're very much in favour of direct democracy, obviously. So everybody wants more services, but, I mean, let's be honest, nobody wants to pay more tax, do they? So don't we need politicians to balance those two realities?
Well, the opposite's true. The opposite is true, to be frank. When you've got politicians, you'll find, like we have here in the UK, the GDP, debt to GDP ratio is about over 100% now. The Swiss have less than 40% because they are controlled by the referendum. They are controlled by the people. What you get now is you'll get your HS2s and all the other ways that these people can spaff your money away without any recourse to the people and their thoughts. You are now being basically ruled by people who are ruled by others. That's the reality. Why have we got so many people coming into this country? And not just here, I mean, there's many other countries that are suffering from the same problem because you don't have control of the politicians, okay? The only country, probably, or the best country in the world in terms of government is Switzerland. Those are the words of Nigel Farage, by the way. That's why he supports this idea, and that's why I gave him, prior to him saying that, my book on this subject. Because I wanted to, we knew from being in UKIP that Nigel would obviously support, or was more likely to support this. So, in terms of if you're going to have the people controlling the purse strings, then well, you're not going to get it blown away. It's the same, and there's proof of this in the United States, a great deal of proof. In the United States, there's California and many of the other countries have the right to referendums and initiatives. So what you find there is you can see where there are trials, basically, where you can go and look at what happens where the representatives can control the results in the legislation, or where similar has been done with the referendum being controlled, an initiative or proposition as they call them in the States. And if you read the book, Let the People Rule, it covers that very fully, very deeply, and it makes it very clear that the representatives are more likely to be swung for high spending than the punters, because they've got to foot the bill. The legislator may well get a nice little contribution towards his next election. That is the problem that we have with the system that we do have. It's a straightforward party system. It has not got the leavening, as it were, where you put into this mixture the right to call referendums. So it's a semi-direct democracy that you need, and that one where the people can call referendums on issues that they think are important enough. So all of this, I will blow it all on the taxes. Then why have we got more than double the debt level, not they're only 8 million, so it's lower than our debt in terms of the full quantity, but this is why we need to be looking at this system. It is not what they try and tell you all the time. The endless, people have interest, even the media. What would they do if there's less interest in what they're talking about every day? 24-hour news. Who cares about all of that? If you've got control of the system, then you don't sit there watching the telly all day. You'll talk amongst yourselves. You go to the cafe, you have a chat down the pub, and have a chat about the next referendum coming up. And they have them 4 times a year. Okay, and that is several referendums at once, national or local in Switzerland. So the system is designed so that the people can control it where they want to. And they've been doing it since 1848. This is nothing new. You don't need technology. You don't need to have a blockchain thing. It's all done on paper. Okay, so the money is not wasted because all the decision making is pushed down to the lowest level possible through subsidiarity, as they call it. So that those major issues, defence, are obviously held at the federal level, and then they're pushing down to the lower level the other decisions that are affecting you more locally, a recycling centre or whatever. And the people could have the say on it if they want it. if it's the dog catcher's salary, they're not going to worry. So they won't get a big push to have a referendum on it. So you'll find that's why the referendums come out. They control it. Just to give you a quick example, nuclear shelters. What country in the world, the only country in the world, has enough nuclear shelters for everybody in it? You've guessed. It's the semi-direct Swiss. Okay? They can house 9 million people on a nuclear strike. Think about that. They all got shelters. Every single one. Who've we got it for? The establishment and the generals. I was only a major, so I can't claim a place in there, but you know how it goes. Really, so that's what I would say. The people will decide. It'll be done sensibly. It'll be done reasonably. And the Americans have proven this with legislation versus initiatives. Right, thanks.
Well, thank you for that. It's interesting that apparently the only country in the world that can provide protection to its citizens for a nuclear strike is, of course, a famously neutral country and therefore very unlikely to be hit by nuclear weapons. But nonetheless, Joanna, I think you wanted to respond to that.
I was saying, Neil is correct in so many ways where the political class has pretty much dodged all the big decisions. So you think about immigration control, you think about housing, you think about the tax burden. All of that is not within our control. But referendums basically exist because Parliament has created a backlog that makes people feel as if they aren't heard. We have all these unanswered questions and we feel like we need to take the power back. That is essentially them doing a bad job. When you look at all the reasons why referendums don't necessarily work out, I mean, think about it logically, right? So the first objection I have is thinking about referendums basically unbundle things that should be bundled. You get a question without necessarily realizing the cost. So take, for example, if I presented the question, the NHS, we should put more money into the NHS. A lot of people would say yes to that. I mean, would this room say yes to that? We want the NHS to thrive, right? But okay, next question. Would you like to pay higher taxes? Well, then that would be a no. But oftentimes there's a clear link. Obviously, to spend more, you need to tax more. Or you need to cut somewhere, okay? So we're unbundling things and we're asking direct questions without having a clear understanding that there are trade-offs. And when you have referendums and it's a simple question, it always has to be a simple question. It's exactly why, do you want to leave or stay in the EU? That's why we have it. People in Parliament their primary job, and if it's done really well, is taking all these singular questions from the public, bundling it together and coming up with a budget. What we have is people in government that aren't necessarily doing that enough and doing enough on-the-ground surveys to realise. That's why we're in the position that we're in. And essentially, Neil, you spoke about California and them doing it correct, but they had fallen into the trap where they asked these singular questions. They had conflicting mandates where they just didn't know how to put it together in the first place or deliver what all these referendums they had wanted at the end. Like, they fell in the trap of that. So, we think about it in the British system and we say, okay, well, we want more NHS spending. We don't want more taxes. We want free transport and cheaper bus fares. We don't want to raise taxes. We're in that situation now. What eventually ends up happening is civil servants trying to make, a square a circle. We're going round in circles and we have no idea how to actually deliver all those things. Yet, you have a public mandate because referendums, you can't go back on it. If you have a statute, you can amend it when the conditions change or when the context changes. When you have a referendum, you are locked in for about a decade. You can't change that. You can hardly ever go back. So you just have this endless cycle and this wheel where we're trying to deliver all these different things that directly contradict each other without people at the top. And I understand that in our democracy right now, we don't have people at the top that are packaging what we want in the right way. But what is the correct way? And is there a way to alter what we already have instead of break open a system and expose ourselves to an issue where we will still never get what we want, but we will be in a worse situation?
Okay, so, Joanna, you've worked for, it's fair to say now, a number of think tanks in Westminster. If there were to be more referenda, how do you think that would impact the process of policy making and you guys trying to persuade people?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of overlaps with what I just said. What devolution promises is closer proximity to government, but it doesn't actually promise results. When we look at what's happened, so I mentioned Scotland before, one of the best education systems in 1999, that's completely fallen off. Their educational scores, because they have fallen off so far, they have just stopped posting their scores. You're in a business of trying to hide what is happening here. You also have, again, the crime rate. You have a system that's so far devolved and also far from the centre, which means the main Westminster government is absolutely just forgetting about you. It's not our problem. If it fails, that's on you. Then you also have places in councils, for example. The problem we have with devolution right now is that if we give them the power to spend, they must have the accountability and the responsibility to fail as well. We see it with, when we bring up this discussion we are directly talking about Andy Burnham giving metro mayors more powers. Perfect. He comes from a background of Manchester, Greater Manchester, who has had 15 years experience being an independent council. He's also been heavily attached to that era. He's lived in it. He knows it like the back of his hand. I've never disagreed with any of the benefits that he's brought to the place. The bus fare system, amazing, very good. Beat targets over 10% in 2023-24. He's obviously been accomplished in those areas. But on the flip side of that, you have other councils with mayoral capabilities that were established in 2024. They do not have the experience. They do not have the support. This is where many reform mayors have fallen flat, because they have no idea how to balance a budget. They have no idea the kind of stresses that council budgets takes on. A council budget is not just you pay your council tax, you get your bins delivered, you fix the roads. It's not just that. You have the social care precept, you have the national government telling you what you need to spend your money on. I mean, a lot of their budget is ring-fenced, so a lot of your decisions aren't your own. And there's nothing you can do to stop that. You also have Send, for example. That's a big issue right now. A lot of these places just aren't ready for it in the capacity that we need it to be. And unless there's greater support and greater strength for these mayors, then I don't see it working whatsoever. I think that's when you look at policy, you have to think, are these small areas and these tiny councils able to influence policy in the way that they want? Will national government back off in the way that they need to grow? Also, will they be allowed to fail? Because some of these councils, Thurrock, Croydon, I'll go over it more because I have my other things, sorry. But they are millions, if not billions in debt. Birmingham is the best example I can have. And every single time Westminster bails them out and they learn nothing from it. And again, it's not true devolution. It's not real democracy. It's not anything really other than taxpayers footing a bill at the end of the day.
Okay, well, I think you've made your position on devolution quite clear. Neil, it's obviously not quite direct democracy, although there could be, you could have elements of direct democracy within it. But obviously the new Prime Minister seems very keen on devolution. Do you see any real advantages or any concerns about what he might be putting forward in that respect?
Well, I mean, in semi-direct democracy, you've got a lot of devolution of powers, as it were, down to the local level, much more than we've got. So if you want to call that devolution, they call it subsidiarity, is the more accurate term, to the cantons, and even down to the community level. So, and the issue here is Mrs. Burnham involved with the company that's running all of the electric buses then?
Well, the stats for how well it's doing is quite good.
Yeah, the point is, where's the transparency of this? Where is the thought about what the people will think about these issues? It's a lot easier to be a crony and to get yourself involved in the local government if your partner's involved. You know, I was in business. I ran a lot of businesses across Central Asia and in the Middle East. I would never harm my wife. Not a cat in hell's chance I'll get her involved in it. No hope. Because I thought, no, I won't be doing that. Because my day, we had some integrity. In the military, you'd be slung out for a small expense, a taxi bill or something that you fiddled. So it's not about just what you did, it's about being seen. It's about what the people will make of that. So I don't have a lot of time for this. And this is why you've got 40% of people not voting at the last general election. 40%. How much did Labour get? 21% was it, or even less than 20%? This is the point. This devolution idea, it's great to have subsidiarity, but doing it with these clowns, with all of their fake news and their fake parliament, forget it. If we carry on the way we're going and look at the numbers of people coming in here, look at the numbers of the GDP going up, this is all under a representative-only system. That's my point. They're trying to tell you, oh, keep voting for us, but what are you voting for? You're voting within that system for these people who've created the problems. I mean, it's like seeing a guy who's got divorced 8 times and he's going to get married for the 9th time. Complete madness. That is my view anyway. So yeah, in terms of devolving power, yes, absolutely. It's a very good thing. You know, as far down as logically it can go. Was it Einstein said, yes, you can make things as simple as possible, but if they're complicated, they're complicated. That's as simple as they can be made. So if we've got something so complicated, it stays at the national level. It's about nuclear defence or whatever else. But if you can push it down to the community level, why not push it down there? The local people will make the decisions using their logic. I mean, there's a lot of snobbery involved in politics, and they look down their noses at these people, which is why you've got 40% of the voters are not interested in voting. They're just not interested anymore. They've seen enough. They're cynical. They've had enough of this system. So I believe, Nigel Farage, as I've said, he's trying to get it moving. I am talking to local councils now. 4 of them already are. The conversations have begun about using this type of a system at local council level, from county council down to boroughs. So, yeah, those are my thoughts.
Okay, so if we have more devolution or more referenda or some combination of the two, we're probably going to need a better informed voter base. How do you see that happening, or not, as the case may be?
Yeah, but again, you see, this is 1848 they started this in Switzerland. Do you think they had a lot of high schools there and a lot of universities? Were they all highly educated, or were they peasants up in the hills? Right, 1847, Karl Marx, his sidekick, Friedrich Engels, he called them a barbarous people. 1847. 1848, they started to get the right to call, or mandatory right, to have a say on their own constitution. We've got to have some, faith here. People out there are looking after not only their own interests, but their family's interest and the wider community's interest as well. If you're looking at it from the point of view of having a bit of faith in people, then you'll find they will reciprocate that. And they're reciprocating it now by having 40% of them not bothering to vote. So, in terms of, this worrying about the education levels or the exposure, then Dicey covered this back in the 1890s. He was talking about this in the UK. We had crummy education system then, and he was still backing direct democracy because he knew it's just common sense, a lot of this stuff, and you've got to persuade people. And he made the point very clearly that the professional classes were the ones who were easily swayed by propaganda, because they had a particular idea that they were following anyway, and then if you carried on with giving them information that supported that, yeah, they'd be going for that fully on. But they would not be questioning it. But the people who are, you might say, ignorant about that particular problem, but they're not stupid. There's a big difference between ignorance and stupidity. Okay, they are not stupid, but they are ignorant maybe because they haven't been highly educated, but they can think things through for themselves. Why is it most of our entrepreneurs will come from, lower down the working chain without the money? They've got to graft, they've got to use their brains, they've got to adapt. So yeah, I believe that, you know, that we don't have this issue with education. We don't have to worry about that. We're much better educated than Switzerland was in 1848. There is no issue. You do need freedom of speech, though. This is the biggest thing. And we don't have it in this country. We do not have freedom of speech in this country. We can see it. Look at the talk we got just before we started today. I get the same in the free speech talks down in Brighton that I attend. We got slung out of one of the pubs down there. So yeah, we do need much better freedom of speech in terms of if you're going to do this properly.
Okay, Joanna, how do you think we can have perhaps a better informed electorate, whether that's for referendum or just, you know, dealing with local issues at the local level?
So, Britain has always had this problem where politicians believe that the voter base is uneducated, don't know what they're voting for, they need to be told, etc. Voters aren't stupid. They see things through a different lens that when you are in Westminster, it's really hard to pick up on and you don't understand it. I think the issue isn't are voters capable of understanding, it's why is government so complex and so out of reach that voters don't understand it or they feel like they don't. And that's why a lot of people are put off to vote. Again, I actually am more optimistic. I think the voter base, we have a voter base right now that is more politically involved than it ever has been and more inclined than it ever has been. We have an influx of political media across social medias. We have news delivered to you in different formats, so it's not always now just you have to read, you have to see it on Sky News at 6, etc. It's a completely different virtual space, which means so much more is available to you. I mean, you have Reform, you have Restore, two parties on the right, out of three, which is a luxury. But two parties on the right that deliver news to you and announcements through social media first. They live stream it across every single platform. It's not what we thought it used to be. So I think the idea that, and this is where, Neil, your model completely works if you have an informed voter base. You also need to have a voter base that wants to be informed, that wants to be involved in these discussions. And also, you know, a lot of people, I would say, I work in politics, myself included, I would love to sit back, not argue every single point, know my taxes are being cut whenever they should be cut, you know I'm getting services, basic services that I need from the government. I would love to sit back and do that. I think a lot of people in the UK, whenever you speak to them, whenever I go out and speak to people, they don't want to have the argument. They don't want to vote on things. They actually just want a functioning government where they vote once a year on a party that has a specific line that understands that, look, at any given opportunity, cut my taxes. That is what I want, whilst me not waiting for 4 hours in A&E, which, by the way, my record is 8 hours in A&E. So, you know, I think the idea the voter base has to become more educated is completely wrong because it puts the fault on the voter base. It says that we don't know what we're on about. You are a superior class that understands something that we don't. Realistically, if that's the case, government procedures should be less complex. In a way, when the media happens, it should be able to explain that. If that's not possible, then again, the system itself is too complex. The mechanism needs to be changed.
So, we have had some referendums in the recent past, not least of which the one in Croydon which decided to have a directly elected mayor. Council still bust, man you. But we obviously had the Brexit referendum, and a couple of years before that we had the Scottish referendum, and they did prove it, would be fair to say, I think. And whether this is the media, I don't know. But there was, you know, it did cause quite a bit of division. On the other hand, we've got a system now where we've got a number of political parties. Trying to try to remember them all, but it's very difficult these days. And so it's quite possible that, you know, somebody could win the next general election with a relatively small percentage of the vote, let alone if people don't turn out to vote. But even if the actual people who do vote. Neil, can you make a positive case for how democracy might work for us over the next few years?
Yeah, well, it'll only work if we change the system. And we're not talking about a revolution, you talk about an evolution, you're just talking about implementing this right to call referendums, which is exactly what Nigel Farage has been saying. And I've got him on video 7 times in the last few years. Last time was last November. The right to referendums is what what democracy is about, really. If you're only once every 4 years handing over your power to some schmuck like Rory Stewart, and he'll tell you on camera that he goes into that chamber and he does not know what he's voting on. He does not know what it contains and what it's all about, because they haven't got time to read this stuff. And then he does what the whip tells him. And they all get herded in when the bell goes and they go and do their bit. So all this stuff about education, it's tripe. They're not even reading this stuff. They're not even reading it. So the Swiss don't rely on that. You know, we're all mad because we were sold a system, basically the Norman yoke continued out of the feudal era, and the landowners, don't forget there's over 500 landowners with a guy still in Parliament in the 1870s. The whole system was adapted so that you would carry on with a different yoke around your throat. That's the end of it. That's all that's been going on. They'll kiss the baby every so often and do all of that good stuff, and they'll pat you on the head and they'll get themselves elected. That's all it's all about. So Dicey covered the referendum in these terms as well, and he quite rightly said, of course, the first referendum, might be a bit of an issue. The second one, a bit less of an issue. But then over time, of course, the people get used to this idea. And believe you me, like you all put your hands up at the start, they'll be demanding this. And I can tell you, when I give the talks to all of these different groups that I go around this country talking to, and I do a lot of them, it's not every hand, but it's nearly every hand goes up when I ask them about the 0-1-2 system. Would they like that applied? Because they will save money, they will reduce the taxes on their own heads, but they will also get better, more efficient services, and they will not be wasting money on all of these big projects that are of no use to us. And would you have had, as Nigel Farage said himself, would you have had 10 million people come in the last few years? No, you wouldn't, because the people would have called a referendum on it. Because the parties, the point is, you can hold them to account. One of the beauties of the referendum system is that, let's say right now, you've got Labour in, but if you've got a good idea coming from the right, you could still put it forward as an initiative so that they don't have a lockhold on power. And this is the whole point of it, that you can call a referendum while someone else is in power, and you can get the opposite party's view heard on a particular issue. And you can do that routinely. We don't have any hope of that now. And then they're all worried, he'll get back in, they'll be back in 2029, another 5 years. It doesn't matter. In Switzerland, the parties hardly matter. They have a council at the top, 7 seats on the council, and they have, those people are representative in terms of proportionately. It's a collegiate system, because everybody knows that any law that comes out of there has got to get through the referendum sieve. If it's a good idea, it'll get through and it won't be held up. If it's a bad one and the people don't like it, they can stop it. And if the parties want to avoid a particular issue, they can bring up this system and use the initiative and call for a referendum. That's why Switzerland is the best governed country in the world. That is why it's been topping economic, charts for years. Lowest crime rate in the world, maybe fighting with Japan for the low murder rate, but it's got the highest gun ownership in the world practically as well per head, because all of the men have got guns practically. So you've got a highly armed populace with no crime hardly. Why is that? Because the people control that country. They're in control, they're not fighting the system all the time. And this is the point, that's why they've got 75 versus 42%. It varies from time to time what the satisfaction rates are, but we've got 42% before Starmer, before this lot got in. They had 75% happy with the system. The point is, it's the system that's the problem, and it's because they have retained control, and you are not living in a democracy. You are living in a controlled environment. An oligarchy controls it behind the scene, and you're given the occasional, goodies. So Andy Burnham comes in, what does he do? He offers you some goodies, and that will swing it around. Fantastic. You will not get the system change that you want. So I'd say, whatever you do, back the right to direct democracy. And when you get it in your local council, you'll see the benefit immediately. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joanna, have we got anything to be positive about?
I think I need to pick up on a few things said there. Obviously, the Switzerland system is great. It's more than just a devolved democracy. It's more than that, and that's why it has the results that it does. If you look at the times in Britain when we have had a referendum, referendums aren't this kind of like magical device that means people have mandate and then we win, hooray. That's not what's been proven before. The idea that you have people turning out to vote 4 times a year, don't know about anybody here, I definitely don't want to do that. I drag myself out, change my schedule around when I do have to vote once every few years in local elections. Referendums themselves, they create division in different ways. They lock up policy making. As I said earlier, when you have a statute, that can be changed internally based on context points and a change in the ecosystem. You have people writing into their local MPs, you have local MPs raising up PMQs, you have all this stuff. And I understand that it's not necessarily a direct link and you might have to argue again and again and again, but that does show public mandate. It does empower your MP to realize these are the issues that are here and now. When you have a referendum, especially take Brexit, right? It's the easiest one that we can point to, it's the most recent one. You won on a slim margin. It locked up policy so much that MPs, government, weren't focusing on issues that could be solved, but they were focusing on this big question about how we could deliver Brexit in a way that satisfied the referendum, but also at the same time there was still a large portion of the population that weren't satisfied and didn't want this to happen. When you open yourself up to referendums, you have that trouble consistently. And the manufactured kind of positive majorities, but you also create a narrow policy lead and a massive amount of people that are scornful or upset by the result itself, and they feel like they have a greater basis to actually push that. They don't respect the choice of the referendum. So that's what I have to say on that. I will say the British democracy system has never been one that has been fully thought out, one that works smoothly. Usually it corrects errors and we learn from our mistakes and this helps them. To say that we don't have a choice and to say that we don't have any say in what's happening is completely wrong. Look at what's happened, right? In the last 10 years, we've had 7 prime ministers. If you look at Italy, where they have a democracy system, 50 years, 60 prime ministers, right? That shows a turnover because people are writing to their local MP. You have backbenchers standing up. You do have a say to some extent. And again, Neil and I aren't on different sides of the argument here. I can understand the reasons why democracy has failed. I can understand why devolution is something that everyone wants to go for. Again, I think it should be implemented correctly. But the fact that we have a turnover in government is a signal that the mechanism is actually kind of working, where people are somewhat held to account. Keir Starmer was awful with the public. His approval ratings dropped drastically for when he was in. His backbenchers hated him. Opposition hated him. He has 3 parties on the right also hating him. That's a sign of a democracy actually working, where we're listening to the people and we trust our representatives there. I'm not saying it's foolproof. I'm not that crazy. But it is a good sign, and it's a sign that, just because someone thinks they have a mandate doesn't mean that they'll last the 5 years. Personally, I would like to see many, many prime ministers until we can all agree and find a middle ground. I don't mind chopping and changing them out. It's annoying. It's quite funny. But it's still a good sign that we're not under some kind of dictatorship where people don't have the right to speak their minds and be able to chop and change leaders. We still have an error. We still have a margin of error.
Well, thank you very much. I think we can all agree we've had a very interesting discussion over the past, I think it's about 45 minutes. We're now going to have a short break whilst we all pay the beer tax, and we'll come back shortly for a Q&A. But in the meantime, if you could all join me in thanking our panellists in the usual way.